"If you ever leave me, I'll kill you." That is what the defendant said to Charlie Wyrick as he grabbed her by the hair and pulled her back into his vehicle. He told her what he would do to her. She knew. He meant what he said, and he murdered her. You've heard a lot over the last 2 weeks about Charlie Wyrick. She was a daughter. She was a mother. She was a big sister. She was a friend. She cared about the people around her. And against all reason, she loved the defendant. This morning, we're going to talk about lots of things throughout closing. First, we're going to talk about the charges that the defendant is facing, and we'll go over the law. And then we'll move on to the facts and the evidence of this case. We'll talk about how the evidence shows that the defendant killed Charlie Wyrick, that he did it with purpose, and he did it with knowledge. We'll talk about the people who knew Charlie, her friends and family, the people who knew her before she met the defendant, and the people who bore witness to the violence he inflicted upon her. We'll talk about the things she told her coworkers and what they observed. We'll go over what we heard from medical professionals, the doctors and the nurses, what her roommates told us about their relationship, and then what they told us happened on December 21st, 2015, the day that Charlie died. We'll go over what happened in the following days, the criminal investigation, all of the forensic evidence, and then we'll talk a little bit about the things the defendant did and didn't do to cover up what he had done. Finally, I'll go through some of what I think the defense will argue. And then, after you all heard many witnesses, many objections from both sides, many delays, and many trips to the courthouse for all of you, you'll have the opportunity to hold the defendant responsible for the storm that he caused, for the destruction that he's left in many lives. I'll ask you to find justice for Charlie, to find justice for her family, and to tell Mr. Gomez that he cannot get away with murder. So let's start with the charges in the law. Mr. Gomez is charged with partner family member assault. The judge read the definition of partner family member assault. A person commits the offense of partner family member assault if that person purposely or knowingly causes bodily injury or reasonable apprehension of bodily injury to a partner or family member. And that's kind of a mouthful, so I'm going to break it down into the elements. The first element, a person, the defendant. The second, that he acted purposely or knowingly. Purposely is defined as the person has a conscious object to cause a specific result. With respect to partner family member assault, it's the conscious object, the intent to cause bodily injury. He either has to act purposely or knowingly. Knowingly is that he's aware of a high probability that the conduct he's engaging in will cause that result. So he's aware of a high probability that he will cause bodily injury. You have the bodily injury instruction. It means pain, physical pain, and then to a partner or family member assault. And Charlie was his girlfriend, so she was a partner. He's also charged with deliberate homicide. You've been instructed that a person commits the offense of deliberate homicide when that person purposely or knowingly causes the death of another human being. So the elements here, the defendant, the person, purposely or knowingly, we went over that, the same definitions apply here, caused the death of Charlie Wyrick. That's what the state has to prove for you to find him guilty. So, Let's talk about Charlie's friends and family and how they implicate Mr. Gomez in this offense. First, you heard from Kimmy Mulcair. Kimmy has known Charlie for about 10 years. She was her best friend. Charlie called Kimmy one day in September, and she said, "I'm scared. I'm in an abusive relationship." She was terrified of the defendant, and she wanted Kimmy to come pick her up and bring her back. After Kimmy spoke with her over a week and heard her tone and heard what she had to say, Kimmy said, "I need to get to Missoula, and I need to get there now." She drove over to Missoula. When she got here, she had to hop into another car quickly so that she would not be seen. Based on what she heard that day about the defendant and what was going on, she asked, "Do I need to get a gun?" She and Charlie were both terrified. Kimmy took Charlie back to Helena. Then on the way back, Charlie described her fear of the defendant. She said he would beat the crap out of her. He would take her out to a wooded area, and every time he took her there, Charlie was afraid because he thought that she was taking her there with the intent to kill her. When they got to Helena, Charlie showed Kimmy a photo of the defendant, just so Kimmy would know if he had followed them. Charlie stayed with Kimmy for a week, and Kimmy went out of town, and when she came back, Charlie was gone. Oddly, most of her things were still at Kimmy's house. Charlie didn't respond to Kimmy for about 4 days, but when she finally did, she said she'd come back to Missoula. Kimmy didn't speak with Charlie much after that, and that was the last time she ever saw her. When Kimmy saw on Facebook on Christmas Eve that Charlie was missing, she called detectives. She frantically told them, "You need to look in wooded areas and canyons." She couldn't remember the name, but she knew that's where the defendant had taken Charlie multiple times. She told Detective Lear, "The defendant takes her out to this place. She would feel like she was going to be killed there." Kimmy told Detective Lear where to find Charlie, because Charlie had told her, and she was right. We also heard from Tirsa Rollins. Tirsa lives here in Missoula. She worked with Charlie at a previous job. She told you that before Charlie got seriously involved with the defendant, she used to call her son Harley every single night to say goodnight to him. She said that stopped after Charlie and the defendant got together. Tirsa also said that her contact was limited with Charlie too, once Charlie started dating the defendant. She said Charlie wasn't allowed to contact me anymore. Tirsa reported seeing Charlie with a broken nose, with black eyes, fingerprints around her neck, and lots of bruises. She told you about the time when the defendant pulled Charlie into the car and told her that he would kill her if she left him. Tirsa asked Charlie, "Why? Why do you stay?" Charlie said it was because she loved him. She said when it was good, it was really good. But when it was bad, it was really bad. Towards the end, Charlie told Tirsa that the beatings were getting more frequent and severe, and that the defendant told Charlie again he'd kill her if she told anyone. And just like Kimmy, when she realized Charlie was missing on Christmas Eve, Tirsa called law enforcement. She told them, "Charlie is up Patty Creek Canyon, and she will not be coming down." And she too was right. We heard from Megan Ratcliffe. That's Max's girlfriend, Max, Charlie's brother. Megan described Charlie as initially a happy and bubbly person. However, when the defendant was around, Charlie was not her happy, bubbly self. She said Charlie was afraid and she wanted out of the relationship. She said when Charlie came over in December, she had a plan to leave the defendant. She was going to go to Helena. We heard from Max also, Charlie's brother. He too said Charlie was trying to leave the defendant in December. On December 16th, he picked her up from the hospital after the defendant had caused her rib injury. He tried to get Charlie to get the police involved, and she wouldn't, because she had a plan to leave. She came over again on the 20th. She said she and the defendant were fighting. Max had gas money, and he said, "I will take you to Helena right now. I have the money for gas. I will take you. Let's go. Everything will be okay." Then the defendant came over to Max's house, and Max had a word with him. He said, "I don't know what's going on, but it seems to me like she does not want to be with you anymore." The defendant left. Charlie spent the night at Max's, and that was the last night Max saw his big sister. Keely, his roommate's daughter, said that in the morning, Emmanuel had come to get Charlie, that she hugged him and apologized. Max woke up the next morning to find Charlie's blanket, her cell phone, her gloves, and a hair clip on the floor where she'd spent the night. Finally, you heard from Charlie's grandmother, Lucy Carlson. She had a special relationship with her granddaughter, Charlie. She described a time when she brought Charlie's son Harley over to Missoula so that they could go to the Dinosaur Expo. She met Emmanuel for the first time that day, and she said that Charlie acted differently around him. Then, when Charlie came to Helena to stay with Kimmy, Lucy spent some more time with her. Lucy saw the bruises the defendant inflicted on Charlie. She saw clumps of hair missing from Charlie's head. But Lucy thought that Charlie was out of danger. She was free from the defendant. She thought Charlie was moving to Helena then and there and that she was going to stay. However, she found out the next day that Charlie had gone back to Missoula with the defendant. The last time Lucy spoke with Charlie was on December 20th. That was a Sunday. Charlie needed some money, and as always, Lucy agreed to send some. She also sent Christmas cards with money in it for Charlie's brother's girlfriend, and her daughter. She sent that package to Charlie at the defendant's address. She sent the package on Monday, December 21st, the day that Charlie died. Charlie was dead when the package arrived. Lucy identified the cards that she sent as she testified. They're pictured here in Exhibit 33. You'll have those in the jury room. They were found in the defendant's vehicle. The cash was gone, and if you look closely, you can see here that the envelope is opened. It reads in cursive handwriting, Charlie Ann. The card reads in the same cursive, Love, Jima. So now, we've discussed how friends and family implicate the defendant. Let's talk about the coworkers. Charlie worked mostly with men back in the deli at Patty Creek Market. She had a couple of girlfriends at work, and she let all of them in a little bit more as time went on. All right, we heard from Joe Starr. He knew Charlie's boyfriend to be Emmanuel. He pointed him out in the courtroom. He said Charlie told him to keep it professional, work-related, because her boyfriend has trust issues. She said if it seemed like he was hitting on her, she would have consequences. She was also close with Corey Ortner. They would often close the deli together. Corey observed bruises on Charlie. He saw how she changed the way she acted when the defendant was around. And he said that Charlie was sure not to talk to any males when he was around. He also pointed out the defendant in the courtroom. And then we have Hunter, the kid who's always one of the cooler guys. He described a time when the defendant just stood at the hot case and stared at Charlie. He tried to talk to him. The defendant ignored him. He was just watching her work. He said he saw her with a bruised eye and knew she had a concussion. He also said he would see her crying at work. He said that she told him she was not allowed to talk to most men because the defendant would get mad. And when Ms. Kaufman cross-examined him, he explained that Charlie would tell him what was going on with she and Emmanuel. And he said, I don't remember doubting her, what she was telling me, but it's hard to believe. He described what she was telling him as crazy, it's not part of the real world. Unfortunately, though, it was the real world for Charlie. You then heard from Karen Fairclough. She was the store manager. She described Charlie as a good employee. She recalled Charlie telling her that she had fallen down the stairs when she got her concussion in October, and I'll come back to that in a bit. She said she drove Charlie to the hospital on December 16th when Charlie had a rib injury, and Charlie told her that her boyfriend kneed her in the side. When Charlie came back to work the next day, Karen asked her, "Are you safe at home?" She said, as long as there were a lot of people at her house and she kept her mouth shut, that she'd be okay. But that was the last time that Karen ever saw her. We heard from a girlfriend of Charlie's who also worked in the deli with her. Mary noticed over time that Charlie became reluctant to see Emmanuel, that when he was around, Charlie seemed antsy. She recalled a time that Charlie came in with a broken nose, and that was in October. Charlie first told her that she'd slipped on some ice. This is important. I hope you've noticed throughout the trial that Charlie told some people she slipped on some ice, some that she fell down some stairs, some that she fell in the driveway, and another that she hit her nose on a beam over the stairs. The judge let these statements come in because we're not offering them for the truth. They're offered to show that she told different people inconsistent stories to protect her boyfriend. But Charlie told Mary that day that she'd slipped on some ice. And then later Mary described it. Her breath fell, and she said that was a lie. There was another time Charlie came in injured in December. She was distressed, pale, holding her side. She couldn't walk or stand up straight. She told Mary that Emmanuel had kicked her. Mary described a time when Charlie came back from lunch. She ran in, disheveled, distressed. Charlie told Mary that she and Emmanuel had gotten in a fight and he'd pulled her hair. We can wonder if this was also the time that he told her he'd kill her if she ever left. Finally, Charlie told Mary, "If I ever go missing, look for my body in Patty Canyon." Because Charlie knew Emmanuel's plan for her. We finally heard from Dylan Moore. He was probably the closest coworker to Charlie. He told us that Charlie could not speak with any of the male employees, or Emmanuel would come in and deal with them. He talked about Charlie telling him that she was afraid for her life. He saw her with a chunk of hair missing. He saw her with a black eye. He saw her experience pain from her rib injury. She told him the same thing she told others in December, that he had kneed her in the chest. He described her will as broken towards the end. She was afraid to go to the police because they couldn't protect her for long enough, and the defendant would retaliate. He told you, Charlie told him that the defendant had been taking her up Patty Canyon, showing her places off the side of the road and showing her ditches. He had started putting on his shoes and his clothes using gloves. She was terrified. We'll come back to what Dylan said happened when he and his mother confronted the defendant on Christmas Eve. But now we have Charlie's friends and family and her coworkers implicating the defendant. So let's move on to what we've learned from our medical professionals. On October 25th, 2015, we have the defendant's visit to Dr. Eichhorn. He was diagnosed with a broken hand, but not just any broken hand. He had a boxer's fracture. He had the type of fracture that is most likely caused when someone hits something or someone. The next day, October 26th, Charlie sees Dr. Kazmay. for a nasal fracture and a mild concussion. Finally, Charlie sees Dr. Krebsbach, her, I think, family practitioner at Partnership. 4 days later, so October 30th, she went in when her concussion symptoms had not subsided. You heard Dr. Krebsbach reflect on the stand. You heard her express concern about the closeness in dates with the defendant's boxer's fracture and Charlie's broken nose. She said it gave her pause, and it should give us pause too. And don't you wonder, how hard must he have hit her that day? October 25th, her birthday. How hard must he have hit her to break his hand, to break her nose, and give her a mild concussion, the symptoms for which did not subside, at least until 4 days later when she went back to the doctor. Just imagine how hard he hit her. Then we heard from Nurse Bennett Holtz. She is the triage nurse at Community Medical Center who saw Charlie on December 16th after her boss drove her to the hospital. Nurse Holtz said that Charlie sat in the furthest triage chair away from her. She put her hoodie up over her head and she was into herself. She was in pain. She told the nurse that she'd been choked and struck by her boyfriend. She said he beat her up approximately an hour before she showed up to the ER. Nurse Holtz told Charlie that she seemed so despondent, and the gravity of this situation seemed more serious than anything she'd ever experienced. She'd been a nurse for 20 years. But Charlie wouldn't let her call the police because Charlie had a plan. She had a plan to get out of this relationship. Charlie then saw Dr. Seuss. Like Dylan said, Charlie's will was broken. She didn't have it in her anymore to protect the defendant, and she said she'd been assaulted by her boyfriend. But she still wasn't either able or willing to call the police at that time. Dr. Seuss ordered an x-ray in the area of the ribs where Charlie was complaining of pain and where Dr. Seuss could see bruising. Dr. Dalen, the radiologist, then testified that Charlie had a healing rib fracture in that area and that the rib fracture was at least 4 to 6 weeks old. So after Charlie left the hospital, she went to Max's house with her plan to leave the defendant for good. But as you heard Detective Weir read the text messages, she went back. The text messages started on the afternoon of December 16th. Not all of them that you heard, but specifically the ones from the defendant that day. At 3:28, from the defendant. I hope you get this message soon enough. If I don't get an answer from you, I told my mom I would call her at 5 and let her know if I was going to move out there with you, yes or no. Charlie, please message me, or something, please. Nothing from Charlie. From the defendant. I love you. Nothing from Charlie. From the defendant. Please, I want to be with you. Then, at 3:38, after silence from Charlie, I was wrong. You did make the biscuits for me. Thank you, and I am sorry. Then he starts to get a little bit more desperate. She's not responding, and he just sent her to work after beating her up. 3:42, Charlie, please, message me back. I beg you, just AM. Nothing from Charlie. 4:09, Charlie, please forgive me and come back home. I love you more than anything. You are my only one. 10 minutes later, silence. Charlie, I know I've hurt you really bad, but please. 4:25, please text. 4:26, I swear on my daughter's life, let this be my last opportunity. Please, one more opportunity. I will prove to you that I love you. 4:40, and nothing from Charlie. I will wait for you. I told my mom no. 4:47, I love you, Charlie. I will wait for you. I told 5:37, 2 hours later, and still nothing. I'm sorry. Please believe me. I want you. Finally, at 5:38, after 2 hours of the defendant texting her, begging her, apologizing for hurting her, she texts him back saying she didn't have service. He says, okay, I love you. She tells him she loves him. He says, I'm sorry, I swear, and tells her to call him. And then he picks her up from Max's house. And there's a calm in the storm. And she's back in his fold one last time. Okay, so from here, we have the roommates. Start with Aaron Getz and Jake Ferguson. Both roommates reported hearing loud fighting between Charlie and the defendant. Aaron was not at the house as much. He's the one who traveled for work. He spent about 2 days a week there at that. Jake Ferguson was there more. He estimated that they fought twice a week. Neither of them were there for December 21st. And then we have Jeffrey Neubauer, who was home on December 21st, but he was asleep. And I would argue that he was mostly out of it for his winter break. He remembers fighting, being loud and waking him up. But when he talked to detectives, he had a really hard time remembering the days, and he said so himself at the time. The takeaway from his testimony is that he heard the fight on December 21st, 2015, and he never saw Charlie again. Then we have Chris Eckhoff. Chris told you his bedroom was directly below the defendant's bedroom. He could hear them fighting all the time. He got a bad feeling from the defendant, he said. He characterized Charlie and the defendant's relationship as unhealthy. He said there was anger and energy behind the defendant's yelling. On December 21st, he woke up to the sound of arguing. It was Charlie and the defendant right above him in their room. He was sure. He remembers feeling that he was just sick of this. And then the argument escalated. He heard a very loud scream and a loud thump or a crash, and things went quiet. He said to himself, "That's enough." He jumped out of bed. He started to get dressed. He said he snapped. He and his now ex-girlfriend, Hannah, both got dressed. She didn't want him to go upstairs without her. She was worried about him. He was worried too. He and Hannah ran upstairs, and he ran down the hall to the defendant's bedroom. Hannah ran to the front door. The defendant's bedroom door was locked. Hannah called him to the front door to show him the defendant rushing to get in the Yukon. The defendant peeled out of the driveway. Hannah testified also. She heard more of the same fight that morning. She identified the voices as Charlie's and the defendant's, and they were coming from overhead in the defendant's room. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear yelling. And then she heard a giant thud. She said it sounded like a bowling ball hit the ground. Then she heard an extremely loud scream. She thought she heard Charlie say, "Ow." She ran upstairs with Chris after they got dressed. She said she was freaking out, she was really afraid, and she thought to herself, I am going to take this girl, I'm going to take her for a walk, I'm going to tell her she needs to leave this relationship, and I'm going to do what I can to help her. But as she ran up the stairs, she saw Emmanuel running out the hallway, out the front door, and into the driver's seat of his Yukon. He slammed the door behind him, and she watched through the glass. She said it looked like he grabbed something in the back seat. His hands were doing something in the back seat. And she thought, is Charlie in the back seat? It wasn't until after the defendant peeled out of the driveway that she and Chris went outside and observed the blood trail from the front door to the passenger side of where the Yukon was. That blood turned up to have Charlie's DNA. Charlie was in the back of the Yukon as Chris and Hannah watched it speed away. She was bleeding. It was around 10 in the morning, and the defendant was on his way up Patty Canyon to dump her body. Hannah and Chris went back inside, and they saw blood leading down the hallway from Emmanuel's room to the front door. Later, when detectives came to the house, Chris was still around, and he posed for a picture to indicate, there's a picture of him pointing down to indicate where the blood had been. By the time detectives arrived, though, 3 days later, it was gone. Chris and Hannah decided to write a note to Emmanuel before involving the police. Hannah wanted to call the police, but it was a sticky situation, and she didn't want to make things worse. We have to remember, it would have been so much better had she called the police, but we have to remember at the time, she didn't realize someone had actually been murdered. So they wrote the note, and they left it on the defendant's door. So we have friends and family, co-workers, medical professionals, and roommates, all implicating the defendant in Charlie's disappearance and murder. Let's talk about Sherry Hargis. She seems pretty fearless. By this time, we know from the deli manager that Charlie was scheduled to work on December 19th and that she worked that shift. She had the day off on December 20th. And then on December 21st, she was scheduled to work. She was a no-show and a no-call. On December 22nd, she was scheduled to work. And she was a no-show and a no-call. And remember, this is a woman who showed up to work with broken ribs, a broken nose, and a concussion. So, Sherry, who is Dylan's mom, hears about this, and she and Dylan get worried. It's unlike Charlie, and they know her history with the defendant. At the very least, Dylan had the information that the defendant had been beating Charlie, had been putting on his clothes and shoes with gloves, and had been driving her up to Patty Canyon to show her ditches. So Sherry and Dylan, they go to Charlie's house on Christmas Eve. They see the defendant. He's in his garage. He's packing the Yukon, and it looks like he's leaving town. Sherry gets out of her car, she leaves the door open, and she gets his attention, and he steps out from under the garage. Sherry steps up and she says, "Where's Charlie?" The defendant says, "Who the fuck are you?" Sherry takes another step forward. "Where's Charlie?" The defendant, "Who the fuck are you?" Now, let's just take a break from their conversation for a minute. A woman he doesn't know shows up at his house inquiring about his girlfriend, or let's even say ex-girlfriend at that time, someone he purported to love. He doesn't say, "What's wrong? Is she missing? Did she not show up to work? What can I do? Where is she? What do you know?" He says, "Who the fuck are you?" Sherry tells him, "I'm a friend." He finally says, we got into an argument, maybe she's at her brother's. He then says he doesn't know her brothers. He doesn't know where they live. And Sherry's thinking, I know that to be not true. I know that you know her brothers. So Sherry said she felt like he was trying to scare her, and then she got angry. She asked him one more time, "Where's Charlie?" The defendant said, "We got into an argument." Took a puff off of his cigarette, and then looked her in the eye and said, "And she ain't coming back." And from that moment, it was on for Sherry. She told him that she was calling the police, and he said, "Huh." She got back in her car, and the investigation and search for Charlie began. So now we have the investigation and all of the forensic evidence. So the first thing the police did that day on December 24th was go to 219 Whitaker to see if Charlie was there. No one answered the door. They knocked, although later, even though they watched the house, the defendant would be seen leaving the house. So they got a warrant to search the house to see if Charlie was there. Their hope, of course, was that they would find her alive. While some officers went up to the house with Detective Lear to look for Charlie, others tried to locate her through her friends and family. Officer Smith, wanting to know who her emergency contact was, contacted the hospitals. He went to community. He heard from Bennett Holtz, the nurse, what Charlie had told her just a week prior. He tracked down Charlie's grandmother, Lucy. Lucy had not spoken with Charlie since the 20th. He located Charlie's brother, and no one knew where she was. Max had not seen her since the 20th. Tirsa and Kimmy both called in to law enforcement. Look in Patty Canyon. Look in wooded areas, canyons. Emmanuel was stopped by police after leaving his house. He gave Detective Lear the key to his room. He knew she wasn't there. Inside, Lieutenant Casina found the note. There's blood everywhere, it said. We need an explanation. Charlie was not in the house. So based on the information they had from the nurse, the note they saw, along with other information from the coworkers, Emmanuel was arrested. His phone was seized when he was seen trying to make a phone call on it, and a search warrant issued for his home. Detective Peterson joined in to help, and she called AT&T. She gave them the phone number that correlated to Emmanuel's phone. They said they only normally go back with location data for 24 to 48 hours. What do you need? And she said, Charlie was last seen at 10 a.m. on December 21st. They sent her an 8-page document with latitude and longitude coordinates for Emmanuel's phone. She read to you the latitude and longitude from December 21st at 10 a.m. She put those coordinates into Google Maps, and lo and behold, they led her to Patty Canyon, where Charlie was eventually discovered. While Detective Weir applied for a search warrant and got her search warrant for 219 Whitaker, Detective Peterson pulled her resources and got out to Patty Canyon on Christmas Eve. She was hoping Charlie was up there, and she was alive. She and Captain Burt did not find her that night. So Detective Weir continued her investigation. She explained that to you when she testified. She testified that there were different crime scenes. We'll start with the crime scene 219 Whitaker. There's Charlie's blood and DNA on the front porch. You have that photo and evidence. Then we have the console from the Yukon. It had been cleaned. They found it in the defendant's bedroom. It still had Charlie's blood and DNA on it. Finally, the bathroom, the shower. The 409 was found in the shower. It was not used to clean the bathroom. It was used to clean the console. That gray towel right there, Charlie's blood and DNA was on that. Then we have the Yukon. There's blood all over the passenger side door. Look closely at this photo. You can see it. Look at it when you go back in the jury room. It's a lot of blood. It was swabbed and tested positive for Charlie's blood and DNA. Inside the Yukon, a Maglite flashlight with Charlie's blood and DNA on it, a pack of Marlboros, more cleaning supplies, Charlie's wallet and ID. The carpet had been cut out, and the Christmas cards from Grandma were there. The console was also missing. Then there's the other car, the defendant's Avalon. Inside, they found a receipt for Walmart for December 22nd. On the receipt, 409, cleaning supplies. Detectives went to Walmart and said, give me your surveillance for this time. You have a photo of it. The defendant, he's there. He's buying those supplies. Blankets in the back of the Avalon appeared to have been laundered. They were still wet and folded in garbage bags. Next, on the defendant's person, we found his phone, which gave us insight into his behavior and relationship with Charlie. His shoes, with Charlie's blood and DNA on them. He had screws in his pocket when he was arrested that matched the screws to the console of the Yukon. You have a picture of his hand, looked to be re-injured. Finally, we have Patty Canyon. So on Sunday, December 27th, detectives went with a search and rescue team up to Patty Canyon. They went at the suggestion of Captain Bill Burt. He said south of that cell phone tower, he'd done many searches and rescues. And based on his knowledge, when a phone pings that tower, the person is usually southeast of there. He was right in this case. He directed where the search would occur, and on December 27th, the search and rescue party found Charlie's body. It was found within 5,000 meters of that cell tower where Detective Peterson and Captain Burt had desperately searched for her nights before. 5,000 meters was the accuracy determination on that line that she read to you. She was found within that accuracy determination. canyon. Here is a picture of the ditch where the defendant left Charlie to die, pushed her off. It's kind of hard to see the exact angle here because it's turned a little bit and I couldn't figure out how to turn it. But when you look at it in the jury room, you can orient it so that you can tell how steep it was. Captain Burt said it was about 45 degrees. Then there was the berm on the side of the road. Detective Van Raxa cleared the snow one layer at a time, and he found 2 handfuls of blood. Finally, there's the place where Charlie came to rest, where she spent several days out in the cold. Alone, she froze. She was covered in branches and snow. She was deep, deep in the woods, far away from her family, her friends. This is where her body was. Far away from anyone who could help her. Her body was recovered that day and she was transported to the crime lab for an autopsy. And I didn't put any pictures in here just so you guys know. Dr. Mortzinos testified that the first thing she did was look over Charlie's body. She observed bruising of various ages all over her body. She said that she had a test to determine whether something was a bruise or an artifact, and she told you about that, and she said she did that to determine that what she was calling bruises were bruises. She then observed the subcutaneous bruises on the tissue underneath the skin, and she listed to you all of the places that Charlie had bruises on her skin and subcutaneous bruises. She spoke about the stab wound, how the knife or the weapon or whatever it was that was consistent with a knife had gone through the soft tissue in Charlie's chest. It pierced her lung and airway, and she began to bleed into her chest cavity, making it hard to breathe. She talked about the acute on subacute rib fracture. Charlie's rib fracture observed by Dr. Dalen had been refractured that day. It caused her spleen to bleed into her abdomen. And there was bleeding, which meant that Charlie was alive during all of these injuries. She told you that Charlie would have to be alive in order for these injuries to bleed. And then she talked about hemoaspiration, another way she determined Charlie was alive. That Charlie began to hemoaspirate, meaning she choked on her own blood as she gasped for air. Dr. Mortzinos described a storm of events that caused Charlie's death. She said she did not die instantly, that all of these things we talked about indicated a period of survival, that she could have lived for up to 4 hours, and that she could have lived if she'd been able to seek medical attention. She said the cause was the stab wound to the chest, and the contributing cause was blunt force trauma to the torso. That's what she said. In the exact same place that Emmanuel had kneed Charlie just a week prior. She concluded the manner of death was homicide. Now I have every arrow, all of the evidence implicating the defendant. There's one more. What the defendant did to conceal what he did. He hid her body far, far away in the woods. He bought cleaning supplies, he scrubbed the console, and he tried to clean. He cut out the carpet of the Yukon. His phone showed his efforts. He sent an email to Charlie after he knew she was dead, and a couple text messages. He did that to cover her up. He called his mom. He made a reservation for a U-Haul. He purchased car insurance. He searched for police scanner codes. He searched for missing persons on December 22nd to see if her name was there. He searched for Missoula stabbings. And again, another search for scanner codes. And he was packing the Yukon full of stuff when Sherry arrived on the 24th. The Avalon was running and he was ready to leave. All of this forms a picture of what happened to to Charlie Wyrick and who's responsible. I want to talk a little bit about what the defense might argue in this case. They might say, but they had good conversations. There's evidence that they had good conversations. They told each other that they loved each other. They did love each other. And I would hope so. I would hope that they had some fun and some good times for all of the things that he did to her. That there was a reason that she kept going back and that she had some hope that maybe things would change. They'll say, Charlie lived in that house and she rode in the Yukon, that's why her DNA was there. It's not touch DNA, it's blood. Her blood was there. There was a lot of it. Detective Lear testified to how much she saw. They might say, but he tried to contact her after she left. Doesn't that mean that he didn't kill her? He was trying to get in touch with her? No. Remember the time that he injured her right before she went to work and she went to the hospital? He was relentless. He texted her over and over and over for 2 hours trying to find her until she responded. In this case, 3 times. And it's because he knew. He knew she was dead. He knew she wasn't coming back. So he didn't need to keep texting her until she finally responded and came back. Ms. Kaufman said in her opening, the state has nothing but assumption and guessing. She'll say we didn't prove our case beyond a reasonable doubt, and she's wrong. We can't tell you everything that happened, but we can tell you more than enough to put the picture together. There's a lot more than assumptions and guesses. There's evidence, eyewitness testimony, forensic evidence, and facts. Ms. Kaufman said, this is a simple case, but despite the volumes of evidence and testimony, she's probably right. It's simple. Charlie screamed when the defendant killed her on December 21st, 2015, and that was the last thing anyone heard from her. She was with him. He dumped her body in Patty Canyon just as she said he would, and that's where we found her. She said that at the end of the case, the state would ask you to make this huge, monstrous leap to find him guilty of murder. I could see that if we brought you a case where a victim had been assaulted once and months went by or time went by and then the victim turned up dead, I could see that being a monstrous leap to determine that that person killed the victim. But that is not the case that you have before you. What you have before you is a person who beat the person he purported to love. He choked her, he broke her nose, he gave her a concussion, he pulled her hair, he injured her rib. Towards the end, the beatings became more frequent and severe. And finally, he broke her will. You have a person who told Charlie, I will kill you. He terrified her by taking her to the place where she would eventually be found. If I ever go missing, look for my body in Patty Canyon. That's what she said. So, the defendant did not have to take this huge, monstrous leap to commit homicide. Based on all the things he did on a daily basis up until that point, he built his path all the way up to that point, and all he did was take the next step. And you too do not have to take a monstrous leap to find him guilty. We've too built you a path, and finding him guilty is your next step.